The hardest part wasn't watching her get rejected. It was watching everyone else pretend not to notice. She sat alone at a small corner table with 2 untouched glasses of water, her smile slowly fading as the restaurant around her continued buzzing with laughter, birthdays, business meetings, and happy couples. The man who had promised to meet her had walked in, looked directly at her, whispered something to the hostess, and quietly left through another door. He didn't even have the courage to tell her he wasn't interested. I had never met her before that afternoon, but something about the quiet heartbreak in her eyes made me realize that some people aren't abandoned because they deserve it, they're abandoned because someone else lacks the courage to be kind. I stood there for several seconds arguing with myself before I finally walked toward her table and asked the simplest question that would change both our lives forever. "Can I sit here?" Before we begin, if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life. My name is Weston Hale, and until that afternoon I believed life rewarded people who kept their heads down, worked hard, and avoided unnecessary complications. At 34, I owned a small architectural design firm that had survived difficult years, and although business was finally improving, my personal life looked nothing like the buildings I carefully designed. Every relationship I had ever tried to build had collapsed under the weight of bad timing, emotional distance, or fear. My father had always told me that emotions distracted people from success, and after losing my mother when I was 14, I accepted his philosophy without questioning it. I buried myself in work because blueprints never betrayed anyone. Concrete didn't walk away. Steel beams didn't break promises. That Saturday afternoon I had entered the restaurant only because my meeting with a client had been cancelled at the last minute. I almost walked back outside after receiving the message, but hunger convinced me to stay. Looking back now, I often wonder how many lives are transformed simply because someone decides to eat lunch instead of going home. She looked elegant without trying to impress anyone. Her light blue dress was simple, her hair carefully pinned back, and there was an unopened gift bag resting beside her chair. Later I would discover it contained homemade cookies because she believed first impressions should include kindness instead of expensive gifts. She had baked them herself that morning for a man she had never met. When I asked whether I could sit there, surprise crossed her face before she forced another polite smile. She quietly admitted that the seat was free because apparently everyone else had already decided not to take it. There was pain hiding beneath the humor. I introduced myself, expecting awkward silence after a few minutes, but instead we found ourselves talking as though we'd accidentally resumed a conversation started years earlier. Her name was Emilia Rowan. She worked as a pediatric occupational therapist, spending her days helping children learn skills most people took for granted. She laughed while explaining that children never pretended to be someone they weren't, which made them easier to understand than adults. I asked whether she wanted to leave. She glanced toward the entrance one final time before quietly saying she had already spent 45 minutes hoping someone would choose honesty over cowardice. She was tired of waiting. So instead of leaving, we ordered lunch. The afternoon slipped away almost unnoticed. She confessed that agreeing to the blind date had taken months of encouragement from her older sister after ending an engagement nearly 2 years earlier. The man she had planned to marry hadn't cheated or disappeared. Instead, he had slowly convinced her she wasn't enough. Too emotional. Too ordinary. Too soft. By the time she ended the relationship, she had forgotten what confidence felt like. I didn't offer advice. I simply listened. Sometimes listening becomes the greatest gift a stranger can receive. Before we left, I asked whether I could replace the memory of her worst blind date with something better. Across the street sat a tiny bookstore with an old cafe hidden inside. She smiled for the first time without forcing it. We spent another 3 hours there. When we finally exchanged phone numbers, neither of us called it a date. It simply felt like two lonely people refusing to let disappointment have the final word. Over the following months, friendship grew naturally. Every Saturday morning we explored somewhere new. Farmers markets. Art museums. Botanical gardens. Community festivals. Everything happened beneath bright skies because Emilia believed sunlight made difficult conversations easier. She noticed details everyone else ignored. Elderly couples holding hands. Children chasing pigeons. Street musicians playing songs no one stopped to hear. She carried kindness like breathing. One afternoon she disappeared during our walk through a public park. I found her 20 minutes later sitting beside an elderly woman whose grocery bag had broken open across the sidewalk. Emilia had helped gather every apple, every loaf of bread, every carton of milk before walking her safely home. She apologized for making me wait. I realized I would gladly wait a lifetime for someone whose heart naturally looked for people everyone else overlooked. Yet despite the growing closeness between us, invisible walls remained. Whenever conversations drifted toward family, Emilia carefully changed the subject. Whenever mine did, I became unusually quiet. Neither of us realized our pasts were approaching faster than either of us expected. Everything changed during a charity fundraiser organized for the Children's Rehabilitation Center where Emilia worked. She invited me as her guest. Watching her interact with children transformed the way I saw her. Every frightened child relaxed when she knelt to their eye level. Every worried parent smiled after speaking with her. She remembered birthdays, favorite colors, stuffed animals, and tiny victories nobody else celebrated. Then a wealthy donor entered the ballroom. The color disappeared from Emilia's face. She whispered only one name. Graham. Before I could ask who he was, he noticed her. The confidence vanished from his expression almost instantly. He approached cautiously, introducing himself to me before asking whether Emilia had found happiness. She answered politely, but I could hear old wounds reopening beneath every carefully chosen word. Only after he walked away did she confess the truth. Graham wasn't her former fiancé. He was the father of her former fiancé. Years earlier he had privately begged Emilia not to marry his son because he knew what kind of man his son truly was. She hadn't believed him. Months later she discovered countless lies, hidden debts, emotional manipulation, and betrayal. The engagement collapsed. She blamed herself. Only now did she realize Graham had tried to protect her. The revelation shocked me because life suddenly seemed less simple than heroes and villains. Sometimes people fail while trying to do the right thing. A week later another surprise arrived. My estranged father called after nearly 8 months without speaking. His voice sounded weaker than I remembered. Cancer. Stage 4. He asked whether we could meet. Every painful memory returned instantly. The impossible expectations. The emotional distance. The constant criticism. The years spent believing achievement mattered more than affection. I almost refused. Emilia never pressured me. She simply reminded me that forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees the future. I agreed to see him. The man sitting across from me barely resembled the powerful businessman who had dominated every room throughout my childhood. Illness had humbled him. Silence had aged him. Regret filled every sentence. He admitted he had spent decades confusing strength with emotional isolation because his own father had raised him exactly the same way. Then he handed me a faded photograph. It showed my mother holding my hand outside a small neighborhood restaurant. On the back she had written one sentence. "Teach him that kindness is never weakness." My father began crying. He confessed he had hidden the photograph because every time he looked at it he remembered the promise he failed to keep after losing her. For the first time in 20 years, I hugged him. Neither of us spoke. Words weren't enough. Healing rarely arrives dramatically. Sometimes it begins with one embrace. I thought life was finally settling into peace. Then everything collapsed. Emilia suddenly stopped answering my calls. Days became a week. A week became almost 2. Fear replaced confusion. When she finally invited me to meet, she looked exhausted. Her younger brother, Noah, had secretly accumulated enormous gambling debts while trying to rescue the family's struggling business after their parents passed away years earlier. Criminal lenders were threatening him. Without telling anyone, Emilia had emptied her savings to protect him. She had even listed her small condominium for sale. She apologized for disappearing because she believed bringing me into the situation would only destroy the happiness we had carefully built. I felt hurt. Not because she needed help. Because she believed she had to carry everything alone. Our first real argument followed. Not with anger. With tears. She believed love meant protecting people from burdens. I believed love meant carrying burdens together. Neither of us knew how to convince the other. Days later Noah disappeared. A handwritten note apologized for ruining everyone's lives. Panic spread through the family. Police searched. Friends searched. I searched. For nearly 48 unbearable hours nobody knew whether he was alive. Finally we found him sitting alone beside a quiet lakeside pier outside the city. He hadn't planned to end his life. He simply believed everyone would have a better future without him. Emilia ran toward him before anyone else could move. Watching brother and sister collapse into each other's arms became one of the most emotional moments I have ever witnessed. Noah surrendered to the authorities regarding the illegal lenders. Investigations uncovered an organized financial crime operation targeting desperate small business owners. Many families were saved because Noah chose honesty instead of hiding forever. Months passed. My father began spending weekends volunteering at the Children's Rehabilitation Center after completing treatment that gave him precious extra time. He admitted helping children taught him more about courage than decades spent chasing wealth. Graham also became one of the center's largest supporters after reconnecting with Emilia, not out of guilt, but gratitude that she allowed forgiveness where resentment would have been easier. Life slowly rebuilt itself. One bright autumn afternoon I invited Emilia back to the same restaurant where we first met. The hostess recognized us immediately. She smiled before seating us at the exact same corner table. Only this time there weren't 2 untouched glasses of water. There were flowers. Warm bread. Laughter. And memories that no longer carried pain. I reached into my pocket and removed the unopened gift bag she had carried on the day we first met. She stared in confusion. I had quietly asked her sister to keep it all those months ago. Inside remained the homemade cookies she had intended for someone who never deserved them. Of course they were no longer edible. But they represented something far more valuable. Hope that survived rejection. I told Emilia that the greatest blessing of my life happened because one man lacked the courage to sit down. Another man found the courage to ask one simple question. Then I placed a small velvet box beside the old gift bag. Before opening it, tears were already streaming down her face. She whispered that she had once believed rejection proved she wasn't enough. Now she understood rejection had simply redirected her toward the life she was always meant to find. When she finally said yes, the entire restaurant applauded. Several people admitted they remembered the heartbreaking afternoon when she had been abandoned at that very table. Now they witnessed the ending nobody could have imagined. Even the hostess cried. Exactly 1 year later, beneath clear afternoon skies surrounded by children from the rehabilitation center, family members who had learned forgiveness, friends who had witnessed impossible healing, and strangers whose lives had unexpectedly become connected, Emilia and I promised to spend the rest of our lives choosing each other every single day. As she walked toward me, I realized love had never entered my life with fireworks or perfect timing. It arrived disguised as someone everyone else overlooked. It began with compassion instead of attraction. With listening instead of impressing. With kindness instead of convenience. Our marriage didn't erase painful memories. It transformed them into reminders that broken chapters are not the end of anyone's story. My father lived long enough to hold our first daughter before peacefully passing away with gratitude instead of regret filling his final days. Noah rebuilt his life honestly and eventually opened a community financial counseling service that prevented other families from making the same desperate mistakes. Graham became like another grandfather to our growing family, proving redemption belongs to anyone willing to face yesterday with humility. Every anniversary we return to that same restaurant. We order lunch. We sit at the same corner table. And before leaving, we quietly pay for another person's meal without telling them. Not because we expect recognition, but because we never know whose life might be changing at that very moment. Speech balloon special request: before the story ends, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in this situation? If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more meaningful and inspiring stories. Your support encourages us to keep creating stories that touch hearts around the world. Life has a remarkable way of closing one door only to guide us toward another we never imagined existed. The people who reject us do not define our worth, the pain we endure does not determine our future, and the kindness we choose to show complete strangers may become the beginning of the greatest miracle in someone's life, including our own. Never underestimate the power of a simple act of compassion, because sometimes the smallest question, asked with the biggest heart, can change two lives forever.